Thank you, Madam President. 2 weeks ago, Republicans passed one of the most unpopular bills in the history of the country. One of the most unpopular bills in the history of the country. And now that it's law, we don't have to imagine anymore what might happen. We know for sure what's going to happen to tens of millions of people all across the country. I want to focus on 5 things that are going to happen. 5 things that are going to happen because we no longer have to talk about a House version and a Senate version or what the president says he wants or what someone says they're going to, if I don't get this, I'm going to vote no. Now we have a law. We have public law, federal law. First thing that's going to happen, 17 million Americans, including 9 million people on Medicaid, will lose health care coverage in about 18 months' time. To keep their coverage, people will have to complete hours and hours of paperwork just to prove that they're working. That's in spite of the fact that the number of non-disabled adults on Medicaid who don't work is very low, about 8%. So how do these work requirements actually function? Well, in Arkansas, which is one of the 2 states that tried this and then pulled it back because it was a failure, the reporting portal was only open during the day and closed between the hours of 9 p.m. to 7 a.m. So let's say you work long hours as a truck driver. If you're trying to log on at night to fill out your forms, you are out of luck. Or let's say something unfortunate happens to you. Let's say you get in a car accident or have a bad case of the flu. Maybe you're not hospitalized, but you are incapacitated, at least temporarily. If you miss the reporting window, you might lose the coverage. And what's preposterous about these Medicaid work requirements is in order to establish that you're either working or seeking work, you have to fill out a form. If you get sick and are bedridden and can't fill out the form, they say, don't worry, there's an exception for a situation like that. Guess how you apply for the exception? By filling out another form. There are only a couple of million people on Medicaid who even fit the description of someone who's non-disabled and on Medicaid, and yet the actual official projections, which is to say the way they save the money is they're projecting many, many millions of people are going to get kicked off of Medicaid even though they're eligible. And I know I'm a Democrat and I wanted this bill to fail and I want to tell you why this is a failure of a bill, but that's literally in their projections. Without those projections, they don't have enough revenue for the biggest tax cuts for the wealthiest people in the history of the planet. Number 2, hundreds of rural hospitals and nursing homes will close without enough funding to continue operating. More people are going to get sick because of this law, but we're going to have fewer hospitals and doctors to take care of them. Why? Because Medicaid is a big revenue stream for really all hospitals, but especially rural hospitals. It can be up to about half of what they call the payer mix. What is a payer mix? It's just you might get paid by private insurance 30%, you might get paid by Medicaid 45%, you might have a little VA, you might have a little private pay, adds up to 100%. So as you look at your revenue picture, 40, 50, sometimes even more % of that money comes from Medicaid. If there's a huge $1 trillion nationwide reduction in Medicaid money, that money is reduced money for rural hospitals. And rural hospitals will definitely close. Not all of them, but many of them. So even if you're not on Medicaid, if you live in a place where there's a rural hospital, and that's the flagship hospital for a small town, that might not be available to you. You might have to drive 2 or 3 hours for care, even emergency care. Number 3, starting next year, tens of millions of people are going to pay hundreds of dollars a month more for health insurance. And this one I think we should linger on because now that the fight over Obamacare is sort of in the rearview mirror, people just think they get onto the ACA portal, they sign up for their health care, and they pay what they pay, right? Like, oh, I want a family plan, I want this level of deductible, and then it spits out how much you're going to pay every month. What tens of millions of people don't actually know is those rates on the exchange are subsidized. And without those subsidies, we're going to go back to the bad old days pre-Obamacare when people would pay absurd amounts of money for their health care insurance, even if they're employed, even if they do have insurance. And what is I think underrated, both politically and on policy, is all of those rates get set in the next couple of months. Because in order to start paying and in order to start enrolling, you got to notify people, hey, your thing that was $289 a month, now it's $789 a month. And so sometime in the fall, it depends on the state, October, November, some people in December are going to get a letter saying, if you want to stay on the same healthcare plan, here's your new price. And those new prices are going to be astronomical. Now, we do have a disagreement between the parties. I think there are a lot of people who just don't like public subsidy of healthcare insurance premiums. I'm sure the presiding officer has her reservations about that kind of thing. It is about the size and the scope of government, but there is a factual aspect to this, which is whatever one's governing philosophy is, whatever one thought about the Affordable Care Act, the plain fact of the matter is people are going to get letters from their insurance carriers with astronomical increases that they will not be able to pay. Number 4, 5 million people are either going to lose some or all of their nutritional assistance starting next year. You know, this trope is like almost as old as I am, like some lazy person on food stamps, just like collecting food stamps, loving that life, going to the store, buying fancy stuff. It's $6 a day. The average nutritional assistance amount per person per day is $6. We have actually, I don't know if you know this, but we have subsidized food in the United States Senate, not because the government's paying for it, but because all the restaurants that operate here don't have to pay lease rent. So it's a little bit cheaper than you would normally get. I can't get anything for $6 downstairs in the Dirksen cafeteria, not that would feed me. $6 a day is the average amount. And what the Republicans decided to do is to generate savings, is to find savings, is to cut nutritional assistance. Why? Because they needed to pay for the biggest tax cut in American history for the wealthiest people and corporations that have ever existed. It would be one thing if people were getting $75 a day for food. It would be one thing if they were getting $25 a day for food, but they're getting $6. And 5 million people will now have an enormously difficult time trying to figure out just how to survive the day. And I mean that quite literally, survive the day. Find the calories within your $6 or $8 or $12 budget. Finally, people are going to pay hundreds of dollars more per year on electricity because this bill throttles the cheapest and most abundant form of energy in wind and solar. And this is where you got to stay with me for a moment. I'm very passionate about climate action. I think it is a planetary emergency. I think it is a moral obligation that we take care of our planet so it can sustain us for generations to come. But even if you don't care about that, the only energy that is ready to come online right now is solar energy. Some wind energy, but mostly solar energy. Why? Because nuclear, frankly, takes at least 10 years to permit and site. And of course, anytime anyone wants to do any nuclear power generation, everybody in whatever neighborhood or state or county that is tries to stop it. And so you don't just have regulatory risk, you have project risk. 10 years is an optimistic scenario. I'm a big believer in nuclear energy. But 10 years is the most realistic scenario to get a bunch of nuclear energy online. Likewise, geothermal, maybe 5 to 8 years in the most optimistic scenario. Again, I love geothermal energy. I think it's an untapped resource across the United States of America. We have about a 6-year gap before any of those other technologies are ready. And so a lot of fossil advocates go, well, why don't we do more gas? There is a backlog of combined cycle gas turbines, and that can't just be fixed by saying, I will take more. Everybody wants more. There is a backlog. You cannot get gas generation online in the next 5 years. So what does that mean? It means over the next 5 years, solar is the stuff that is like instantly pluggable into the grid, super cheap, not terribly controversial except for in this chamber, and ready to power the AI revolution and whatever other load needs we have. But this bill kind of punitively, kind of ideologically decides, no, we're not for all of the above. You know that thing we said about whatever's cheap and plentiful and available every time we were trying to prevent clean energy from coming on the grid? Remember that thing we used to say? Now, really what we meant is we quite hate solar energy particularly. We hate solar energy. Again, I think that's preposterous from a planetary standpoint, but even if there were no planetary crisis, this is the energy that is available to us, and we are about to face energy shortages. The reason, for instance, Texas, of all places, has not had blackouts and brownouts is because solar can absorb. When the sun is high and it is 108 degrees and everybody's pumping their air conditioner, that also happens to be the point in time, the point of the day, when all the solar farms are running at full capacity and they can power the grid. And so solar energy isn't something from 17 years ago where you say, you know, sometimes the sun's shining and sometimes it's not, and it's intermittent, and the batteries aren't there. All of that is in the rearview mirror. All the technical issues, not all of them, 90% of the technical issues related to solar energy have been resolved. And that's the scariest thing for the fossil energy people. You know why? Because they can't argue that this isn't economically smarter. They just have to argue that it's like woke or something, like woke electrons. Who cares where the electrons come from? If they are cheap and plentiful, we should all be for them. And so this bill is going to create shortages, which will drive up prices and in some places reduce power quality. What does power quality mean? It means we're going to have blackouts and brownouts across the country. So to do any of these things in a bill would be bad, but to do all of it, in order to pay for the biggest wealth transfer from the poor to the rich in history is morally and economically bankrupt. Nobody asked for any of this. Trump voters were not demanding any of this. Nobody was asking to lose their health care or not be able to feed their kids or pay more to keep the lights on at home. But they raced to do it anyway, knowing full well how devastating it would be for the country and for their own home states. One final point. We are not going to stop talking about this. We are going to talk about this until it is repealed. We're going to talk about this when the rates go up for your electricity. We're going to talk about this when kids are thrown off their nutritional assistance. We're going to talk about this when rural hospitals close. We are going to talk about this when your insurance coverage rates go up. We are not going to stop talking about this because this document, which was enacted into law, is a perfect encapsulation of the difference between the political parties. My party is flawed, obviously. My party is flawed. But I've never seen my party propose a bill that transferred so much money from the poor to the rich. And I've never seen my party propose a bill that raises the price of electricity, that raises the price of food, and raises the price of health care. And so we're going to talk about this today, tomorrow, for the next 18 months, and until this thing is repealed from the federal law books. I yield the floor.